in Just Detention International's Los Angeles office, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. I am going to currently mute everyone just so that we don't get any background noise or interference. We want to be sure we can provide the best audio quality possible. And if it would help, you can mute your own phones and then just press *6 to unmute when you have a question. We also, as you can see on the far left side of your screen, hopefully you can see it, in the lower left corner there's a chat box, and you have the opportunity to either chat with us publicly or send a private chat question. Juliana Baez is here with us today. You've also met her. She's with CALCASA, and she will be monitoring the chat box for us and making sure that any of your questions that come up throughout our conversation today are shared with us so that we can have our conversationalists address those questions, and you can be actively participating with us in that sense. We have in the room with us here today Matthew Van Winkle. He's with Just Detention International. He's joining us just to give us a rousing, spirited support in his presence here, but he won't be speaking on the webinar. Well, I guess you can if you have a question for us, Matthew. So I want to turn for a minute to the slide on JDI's mission. Some of this is going to seem familiar to you. JDI's mission is just solely to be supporting health and human rights around the world. We seek to end sexual violence in all forms of detention. We also hold particular core beliefs. We specifically, our main core belief is that no matter what crime a person has committed, rape should never be a part of the penalty, never ever a part of that punishment. I do want to share with you one little note that we are going to be recording this session today, but do know that that doesn't mean you can hang up right now. We want you to participate because we are very interested in entertaining your concerns and questions and having the opportunity for you to ask the expert, our corrections expert that we have in the room with us today. As you know, when government takes away anyone's freedom, we believe that there's an absolute responsibility that that government also protects that person's safety. So again, looking specifically at our commitment to making sure that rape is never part of the penalty, we want to be sure that anyone that has suffered sexual abuse doesn't have to suffer that trauma as an inevitable part of their prison life. We partner with CALCASA, the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, in our project, and as many of you know, and hopefully you're aware of CALCASA. This is their mission, as you can see on the screen. They're a membership organization of the Rape Crisis Centers and Sexual Assault Prevention Programs in the state of California. And hopefully you are a member organization of CALCASA. They're the only statewide organization in California whose sole purpose is to promote public policy, advocacy, training, and technical assistance on the issue of sexual assault. CALCASA's primary members are, of course, the Rape Crisis Centers, but also the rape prevention programs throughout the state. And they have affiliate members who include many different organizations, businesses, and individuals, those who are committed to the mission and the vision of eliminating sexual violence. We have the California Advancing PREA, or Prison Rape Elimination Act project, in place. It's been in place for about 2.5 years now. And you may or may not be aware that that is funded by the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, also known as CalOES. We have been incredibly grateful for the support that CalOES has shown in having Just Detention International and CALCASA partner on this initiative so that we can provide support to you through a variety of means. Getting the funding, training, and technical assistance out to advocates and rape crisis services throughout the state has been incredibly important from our perspective. We specifically in the program focus on helping guide your rape crisis centers in building those relationships and enhancing the ones you may have with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, which is also known as CDCR, so you'll hear us refer to them as CDCR, and their facilities in your service areas around the state. Additionally, the project provides resources to create lasting arrangements for victim services to incarcerated survivors. The project goals, which you also may be aware of, are three basic goals. We help rape crisis advocates and these CDCR prison staff better understand one another's roles and culture. And specifically today, we're going to look at part of that purpose in looking at the corrections side of that equation and corrections culture. Another component is building the capacity of both the prisons and the rape crisis centers to provide trauma-informed services to incarcerated survivors, as I mentioned a moment ago, and then further developing those program services for incarcerated survivors in a way that can be long-term and truly sustainable beyond the support and funding that we get from CALCASA. Our agenda today is very simple, one item. We're having a conversation with a corrections expert to explore your questions and concerns. The reason we've put this on the agenda and are having this webinar is simple. You requested it. We have decided that it's time that we bring someone to the table who has many, many years of experience, who can truly be here for you, just to be available in an open, transparent, candid way where you can feel confident that your questions can be answered in a safe environment. You don't have to feel embarrassed by any question that you want to ask. You don't have to be uncomfortable asking any question. The sky's the limit. And in a minute, when I introduce our guest expert, I think that you'll understand better why I'm so confident that he's the right person for you to feel comfortable that you can ask him anything that you want today. Before I introduce him and Liliana what I wanted to mention, by the way, Liliana Olvera-Arbon, who you know very well, I believe you know Liliana very well. She's going to be facilitating this conversation with our expert today. And as I mentioned, we want you to submit your questions, but we also gathered questions in advance to prepare. We took the questions that we had been hearing from you over the regional trainings and different types of one-on-one meetings that we've had with you in the past year or so, and more in conversation on phones, and made sure that we incorporated them into today's conversation. So we have a closed caption recording going of the webinar, as I mentioned. We will post that on our website in a few days, and we'll send you more information later today, including a link so that we can get an evaluation of your feedback. We're going to talk a little bit at the end of the webinar about some other resources that we have available as well, and we'll provide you with the web address of our webinar. So now it's time to meet today's conversation team. Liliana, I'm so happy to be sitting next to you today. For those of you, if you can visualize this, Liliana's here with her hair up, looking beautiful and radiant as usual. And I have sitting across the table from Liliana, Thomas Faust of the Moss Group. Tom goes by the nickname Tom. But first we're going to talk a little bit about Liliana. If you don't know her background, she has many, many years of experience working in California in the rape crisis field. She entered the field as a volunteer sexual assault counselor, providing information and hospital accompaniment, and working on a 24-hour hotline supporting survivors of sexual assault. She very, very quickly learned the system and was promoted to a staff position, serving as a hotline and SART assistant, and later as the hotline and SART coordinator. During her time in the field, Liliana learned a lot about PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, but also about campus sexual assault and how to advocate for marginalized communities, which we all know is incredibly important. Liliana's had a lot of unique opportunities to work collaboratively with community stakeholders, as well as college administrators, Title IX coordinators, and campus advocates in creating trauma-informed and empowerment-based holistic approaches. And Liliana currently is serving as the project coordinator for this project and for others here at CALCASA. Her work is focusing on coordination and growth of CALCASA's work with incarcerated systems. So this is prisons, jails, and detention facilities, the college campuses as well, and deepening CALCASA's work with immigrant communities. She is committed to informing people of their rights, and I can't stress that enough. Any of you who spend a little bit of time with Liliana, you can see and feel her passion. It's palpable. She wants to make sure that there are options available and that our world is free of gender-based violence. Liliana, it's an honor to know you and to be your friend.
Hey, thanks.
Our corrections expert, Tom, has joined us today, and he is a friend and a colleague that I've known since the 1990s. So I'm dating Tom and I here a little bit. We go back a ways. You're about to hear a little bit about his background, which is primarily reflective of him being based on the East Coast, but he's currently a resident of West Hills, California. He's employed with the Moth Group, and he serves as, but prior to that, he served as director of the Washington D.C. District of Columbia Department of Corrections from October 2011 until just recently, November 2016. But before joining the district government, Tom had 34 years as an accomplished public safety and business executive. His experience was in the field of criminal justice and organizational leadership. And quite impressively, he held many positions at the Arlington County, Virginia Sheriff's Department, where he was a deputy sheriff, director of administration, and a chief deputy. In 1990, though, Tom was elected to what would be the beginning of 3 consecutive terms as sheriff of Arlington County, Virginia. For those of you who haven't been to Washington, D.C., you may not be aware that Arlington County is a suburb of Washington, D.C., right across the Potomac River. It's a beautiful county, huge county, very populated. He was known as, and still is today, a very proactive, inclusive, and innovative public official. His commitment to quality service is incredible, but Tom is another one of these individuals who his passion is undeniable. You can't be around him for very long without feeling his emotion and seeing it in his eyes. He understood the importance of reaching out to residents, and he was viewed in his work through his connection with the community. He believed so strongly that those connections are important. Connections with advocacy groups and other community-based organizations were a very critical component to his mission. You'll hear it in his conversation today, how much he understands your work and how valuable your role is. After leaving the Sheriff's Office, Tom became the Executive Director, which is also the Chief Operating Officer position of the National Sheriff's Association, which is a nonprofit professional association, much like CALCASA. They serve over 20,000 members in the sheriff's arena across the country. There, his work also included guiding the input of the organization on the early development of the PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act, and its standards. He has a bachelor's degree in science from Virginia Tech and a master's in public administration from George Mason University, which is also out in Virginia. He serves or has served on George Mason University's Administration of Justice Advisory Board, the U.S. Department of Justice National Institute of Corrections Large Jail Network, and as past president of the American Jail Association, which is near and dear to my heart because I'm a former executive director of the American Jail Association. So you can kind of see a little bit of the tie between Tom and I there. So I'm out of breath. We are truly, truly fortunate to have these 2 knowledgeable individuals with us and they're sharing their experience with you today. I'm going to stop talking now. It's your turn, Liliana and Tom. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Liliana to begin the conversation.
Thanks so much, Gwen. And just so you all know, we have some questions here, but you are more than able to ask any questions that come up throughout our conversations via the chat box, and I will be able to let Tom know of those questions. So please ask questions. So Tom, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
We're really happy to have you here, and we wanted to just kind of start by talking a little bit of a corrections facility. And we understand that the facility might vary from, prison to prison or juvenile detention facilities to jails. But can you share with us just a little general overview of the chain of command for facilities?
Sure, absolutely. And let me just start off real quickly, just to say thank you to both Just Detention International and CALCASA for having me here. It's a real pleasure for me to be a part of this, so thank you. Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's correct in that certainly you have differences within the structures of prisons versus jails versus juvenile correctional facilities. However, for the most part, they're very similar. They're all typically very structured in terms of their organization. Now, they may have different titles for various who the people are within the chain of command, but for the most part, even though the titles may change, they're all reflective of, I think, pretty much a very structured organization, and typically ones that do follow a fairly structured chain of command. Again, the titles may change, but typically you're looking at a facility, be it a jail or a prison, to be headed up by a warden or some like title of that. And then I think it's important to realize that within that structure you have both typically uniformed staff and then non-uniformed civilian staff. So it's a mixture of both uniformed and non-uniformed, and both versus civilian. Also, you're always going to have within that structure a breakdown or a separation of security-based staff, operational security of the facility, and then program staff such as educational, case management, other areas. Again, and that'll be very typical between both jails and prisons. So a security staff, program staff, case management, and again, those are a lot of times broken up between the security staff being more of the uniform side, so to speak, and then the program staff, case management staff, typically being more of the non-uniform, many times civilian staff versus the uniform. Mm-hmm. Then you also have medical and mental health staff and personnel within any of these facilities. Then you have support staff, so you have all the maintenance staff that goes on, other kind of support staff, maybe food service staff. Then another layer beyond that, you're going to have contractors, contracted staff that comes in. Many facilities, be it juvenile, local jail, prisons, may contract out services such as the provision of food services. May in fact be contracted out, or it may be run by the actual staff of the facility itself. Medical and mental health services many times are contracted out to an outside entity that comes in and provides the medical services and the mental health services within the facility. And in other facilities, again, it's done internally within the staffing. So, and then on top of that, you have the volunteers, or another layer of kind of the structure or the chain of command, so to speak, and then visitors on top of that. So I think what's important to just in general is all of these organizations, as you come into them, understand that, yes, typically it is very much a chain of command run organization, but also that to look at those organizations as they're almost a microcosm of a city within itself, because you're talking about, again, starting at the warden who has oversight of all these areas that I was talking about. But understand as you're coming into this facility that you have this whole conglomerate of security staff, you have program staff, you have medical staff, you have mental health staff, you have contracted staff, you have food service, you have, all these things that are going on. You have contractors, you have volunteers such as yourself that may be coming in, and advocates that are coming in, and then you have the visitors, family members, others that are coming in. So I think the best thing to say about understanding the hierarchy in a correctional facility is also understanding that although it may in fact be one facility in one large building, it's a very complex facility as far as the interchange between all these different groups.
Thanks, Tom. And this is especially important for our advocates to kind of hear and understand as they're navigating maybe a new space, as they're just starting providing services to incarcerated folks. And so as advocates, as Tom was sharing, this complex system, what we can do in order to start learning these systems. So why do you think it would be important for our advocates to try to understand this?
Well, it's particularly important that as an advocate, if you're going to be coming into a facility or first introducing yourself to a new facility that you may be working with or wanting to work with, I think it's very important. I found in my experience and having been a director of corrections or a sheriff in terms of sort of being on the other side of the fence, so to speak, what I would find effective as a director or someone who's leading an institution is, number one, start off taking a partner approach in terms of first take some time to learn about that facility. Not only just the basics of what type of populations is that facility taking care of, but also in terms of what their mission is. Have you taken time to go on their website? All of these facilities are going to have websites. Mm-hmm. Have you learned what is their mission statement? What is their vision statement? What do they claim that they're about? What are their goals in terms of, because then as an advocate, you can then speak to them as to how can you be relevant to them. Certainly, you have your own goals and missions as an advocate, but I think to be most effective in kind of cracking the code, so to speak, to come into a facility is first get to learn the organization in terms of, again, going to their website, learning about what they're talking about. You can learn a lot from what an agency has worked on to put together in terms of what their vision statement is, what their mission is. Many times it's on there where they may be very programmatically oriented, they may be very security oriented, and a lot of times that's reflected in what they say their mission statement is. But again, preparing for that before reaching out. I think it's very important to say, to try to put in your mind that partner approach to say, okay, as I'm going forward, as I would like to introduce myself to this organization, how can I come across, that messaging is going to be very important. How can I come across as that I can be also do what I need to do as an advocate, but also be a problem solver to help work within their system.
Right. Thank you, Tom. Oftentimes our advocates, some are currently doing a lot of work with facilities, and some are just starting. And so one of the things that CALCASA and JDI has really impressed on them is the importance of taking tours, of learning more about their facility, meeting key people in the facility, like the PREA compliance manager, or even, at times introducing themselves to the warden. And as we've come, a long way through this project, some of the things that we continue to hear from our advocates in the field is that sometimes they're making phone calls, whether it's an introductory phone call or it's a follow-up phone call, or they might write a letter or emails. And, they're trying repeatedly to kind of reach out to the corrections staff. And unfortunately, many times they're not getting calls back, they're not seeing a willing partner, and so how can we, start that conversation? I think you started it earlier by kind of sharing that, but what are a few tips you might give someone, our advocates, when they're not getting those calls back, or if they're not getting the response they're expecting? So how do we help our advocates understand that, and what tips would you give them?
Well, I think a few things. First, again, I would, in terms of learning the organization, and I would say, again, another piece of learning the organization, get an organization chart.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually always on a website. Look at an organization chart. See who, because I think a key piece is you may be calling, you may be sending in letters, but are you identifying the right people? Are you leaving those phone messages for really the right people within that organization? So if you're going into a facility or an organization and you don't even know what their organization chart is, what is that flow of that chain of command, then you really need to learn that, I think, up front. So I think the first thing I would say is try to determine as best you can if you're identifying the right people in terms of who you are initially reaching out to. And then, again, I think in these initial phone calls, in these initial letters of introduction, I would spend some upfront time there to, again, I think that your messaging is important. And I don't mean to say this in a negative way, but then again, in terms of what's the perception maybe of the corrections person that you're reaching out to is, oh, here's somebody else on the out, I've got 100 things on my plate here. Here's someone else from the outside that's wanting something, I need this. So if your introductory message is, I'd like to talk to you about, coming in to do X, Y, and Z, or I would like to do this, or I'd like to have access to your facility, I would just suggest that, number one, remember that initially, I would truly say from my own experience, I think much more often than not, it's not that there's ignoring you. It may also be that they do have 50 other things going on. So I would just say understand that even though as an advocate your particular area is very, very important to both your organization and you as an individual, just understand that that's one of maybe 100 other things that warden may be dealing with. In terms of a PREA compliance manager in a facility, I think another good thing to remember there is rarely, if ever, in most facilities, is a PREA compliance manager as an individual that's their only job. Typically, and I think it's important to remember, typically most PREA compliance managers have other responsibilities. So they may be a lieutenant within the facility, or they may be a captain within that facility. So in addition to they've been handed the duties of, okay, you're the PREA compliance manager for this particular facility. In addition to that, they may have duties as on the security side, or they may have additional duties they have to do on the programmatic side. So I think, again, it's understanding where they're coming from, that more likely than not, those PREA compliance managers, that's not their sole function. So they're going to have a lot of other things going on there. So again, I would just go back to, I think an important thing in hitting it off right, again, that first letter, that first phone call, is spend a little time up front as to sort of preparing your own personal messaging. I think that messaging is important. And look at how, within that messaging as an advocate, how you can be relevant to them in terms of helping them, helping being a problem solver.
Yes.
In terms of PREA, how can you help that PREA compliance manager to assist them in their work, as opposed to maybe coming across as wanting something from that PREA compliance manager. But let me come in and talk to you and let me help you with because I understand that you do have many other duties going on. Let me help you in terms of your duties and responsibilities. Again, in more of a partner situation, and I think that would certainly help. Now, I would say sometimes, ultimately, again, know what that structure is, know what that chain of command is. Personally, I know both as a director and as an elected sheriff, if there were community advocates or other advocates in the community that were essentially coming up against a wall, I wanted to know about it. And so I think that's also important. Follow the chain of command where you can, but don't be afraid to eventually send that letter or make that phone call into the warden's office if you haven't started there, if you're getting a stone wall at the PCM level, or going to that elected sheriff's office. And I can tell you, if you're working with a local county jail within California, sheriffs are elected just like I was, and we're very cognizant of the community and the advocate community, and should be and must be. Reality is, as an elected official, we need to be responsible to the community, or guess what? We won't get reelected. So, I would understand that too. If you truly are getting stonewalled, I would absolutely say take it up to that top level, take it up to that warden, take it up to that elected sheriff, to make them know, because a lot of times if I'm the director of corrections in the District of Columbia, I may be totally, and more than likely am, totally unaware that might be happening at a lower level. But believe me, I think it's important for you to understand in your community that we, and when I say we at the level of a director of corrections, a commissioner of corrections, an elected sheriff, we want to know when you have those kinds of issues.
Yes, and Tom, some of the things for the advocates that are on the call today, there are some key points that I picked up from what you were saying. Messaging is important, advocates, that we really understand how we're coming across to these facilities or these, PREA compliance managers. And, something that Tom has said, and in our work also with corrections, we've understood that most correction officers or facilities are really led by compliance. And so as Tom gave that, tip of being a problem solver, our approach should be similar to that, as how can we help you stay in compliance? And part of that is understanding the system and our systems work that we are leaning towards, right, on how we then connect with these systems and try to understand the systems that we're working in to better advocate for survivors of sexual violence. And one of the things that Tom said too that I wanted to highlight was the parallels, as he was talking about that a PCM might have several responsibilities. Much like us as advocates, we hold different hats as well. We might be a coordinator here, we might be a preventionist, we might be doing hotline calls, we might do hospital accompaniment. So there's a lot of hats that many of our nonprofits really carry, and so we as advocates, I think, should try to understand and have that trauma-informed lens, even with working with correctional folks. So thanks, Tom, for that. And we have a couple of questions from our chat that I wanted to bring up. And Adrian is asking Tom, how many chaplains are contracted per facility? And are chaplains available throughout the day? And maybe Gwen might have some insight on that too. But what role do the chaplains play in facilities?
Yes, I would, first on the specifics as far as numbers of chaplains in the facility, I can't really give a good answer to that because it does, and I think Gwyn's looking at some figures there, and it will certainly differ from facility to facility. But I will say, certainly as far as the role of chaplain, absolutely critical in any facility, be it adult, be it juvenile. In any organization that I've been involved in, the chaplaincy service has always been looked at as a critical component, and not only just in terms of working with the inmate population, but working with the staff, with the corrections population. Many times, you know, we forget sometimes that, again, Liliana was talking about the trauma-informed care, and we talk about trauma-informed care as it relates to inmates, but we need to look at a trauma-informed lens when looking at the corrections officers and the other correctional staff. They work in a highly a facility that is, you know, very a traumatized environment, and they have a lot of they have a tough job to do, and they have family pressures, and they have a lot of facilities that are understaffed and they're working long hours, sometimes back-to-back shifts where they're working, sometimes lots of overtime. They have to miss a lot of Christmases and a lot of Thanksgivings and holidays because they're working their shift and leaving their family at home. So there's a lot of those both internal things to the job, but also all those external things in terms of pressures with the family and balancing their own lives. And the chaplains are just critical in terms of being very supportive, not only of the inmate population, but also as a critical component for the staff. So again, as a volunteer or an advocate, if your role is in the area of chaplaincy services, again, in terms of what I was saying about your messaging, that it's not only a role for what I can do for the inmate population within a facility, but it's all the valuable things and all the valuable support that chaplains bring to the staff of those facilities also.
And I'd like to just add, this is Gwen, I'd like to just add from what I am seeing, and I can't speak to great detail of this because I'm just looking on the internet of a great resource that we've talked about here. And we can get more information on this and follow up, specifically, Adrian, with you. But there are listings, the current job vacancies listed on CDCR's website for chaplains. So, and it appears that they are specifically employees, while many institutions in other organizations around the state, the country, will often use volunteer chaplains. Within CDCR, they have them as hired employees. There are positions for Catholic chaplain, Jewish chaplain, Muslim chaplain, Protestant chaplain, Native American spiritual leader. These are 12 months. They'll be retained for 12 months position, and after this period, the applicant needs to submit a new application. So it appears that they're yearly assignments, and then they re-up. And they generally fall on the flow chart within the organization under the program services section.
Well, one other thing I'd just like to add, I think, and this isn't just for chaplain, but I think specifically in that area, I would highly encourage that you look into, if you haven't already, look into and as much as you can, get involved with, or at least be aware of, what's going on in some of the professional correctional organizations around the country, such as the American Correctional Association, the American Jail Association. Those have standing working committees for chaplains and chaplaincy services. So just as an example, in terms of chaplaincy services, not only in terms of California, but around the rest of the country, If you can, just for professional development, hook into an organization like the American Correctional Association that has very active chaplaincy programs and working committees. So I would always, as an advocate community, I would always recommend that. And again, it gets more about learning about the correctional side of things that you're involved in. If you can get involved in some of these other organizations such as ACA, AJA, et cetera, I think it's a good thing to do.
And the American Correctional Association, American Jail Association, they're organizations that are the equivalent of CALCASA for rape crisis centers here in California. They're at a national level for corrections organizations around the country.
Great. Thank you so much. So much information, such great responses, and please feel free to keep asking those questions. We love to hear them. And Tom, you know, some of our rape crisis centers are working with adult prisons, and some are working with juvenile detention centers as well. And so what do you think, or what can you share with us, how advocates can best prepare themselves to work inside a prison or juvenile detention? And I think that we've kind of touched on some of those things. You know, just some key points that you think are vital in working within adult prison and a juvenile detention facility.
Sure, and again, I think, as you said, we've touched on a few of them, but just some of the areas, again, prior to that, kind of learn something about that agency and particularly about that facility. Certainly that one of the first things would be to get a tour of the facility so that you do see it and you see how it's operated, and so that I think that's very important as far as preparing yourself before you actually go in and do any work. You know, spend that upfront time getting to understand the agency, getting to understand the facility. Again, a lot of that is available online, and then certainly work to get a tour of the facility is very important. So you have a feeling for that work environment in terms of preparing yourself. It's going to be very important to learn and to know the rules and regulations of that facility. As you prepare to come in and do that work, you know, it is important to understand that you are coming into a highly restrictive, typically highly secure building, highly secure environment. So it's going to be very important to learn the rules, learn the regulations, follow the protocols that are required. Again, you want to be seen as a partner within that facility so that when you do come into the facility, you want to be respectful of their jobs, theirs being the corrections people, be respectful of what their responsibilities are in terms of safety and security, safety for yourself as someone coming into the facility, safety for the staff there, the officers, and certainly safety for the inmate population. So it's very important, I think, again, to understand those rules, regulations, protocols. And then what's important about that is as you come in and start working in the facility, the officers, the leadership within that facility very quickly will pick up on the fact that you're in here to do, you know, good work, but you're doing it within the framework of what's required in terms of, again, a secure facility, and that you have a respect and understanding for what their job is also. I think that's those are some key points.
Thank you, Tom. And you know, another thing that as you were speaking that it kind of reminded me of, you know, a lot of our centers have maybe already done a tour. But one of the things that we've heard that has been really helpful for some that are more entrenched in the work has been participating in their volunteer training. And so if you haven't done that, advocates, I'd really encourage you to reach out to your facility and ask for that volunteer training. I think it gives us a more insight on the security piece of their work, and how, you know, we also feel safer going into the facility that way. So, you know, thank you again, Tom, for those wonderful tips. And you know, Tom, one of the things that keeps happening too is that some of our centers are brand new to this work. We really started this work a little over 2 years ago. This is our 3rd year on this project. You know, some started right away. Some had already done work with incarcerated folks, and then some were just brand new to this type of work. But one of the things that's happened is that sometimes working with correction staff can be intimidating. And so, you know, and part of it is the, you know, feeling intimidated and nervous and scared to reach out to some of these correction staff, and it sounds like and it seems like that they have a specific way of communicating with each other. And so, you know, what would be some suggestions you can give to our centers on how to best communicate and not feel so intimidated by correction staff?
Right. Well, again, I would say, you know, a general comment is be real. You know, be real in terms of who you are. Again, very important that they feel that you understand their work environment. So I think that's a good approach, to take. You know, the more you can create personal relationships in terms of, again, speaking to the officers and others, you know, we're all real people too, and you know, so
I can vouch for that.
I mean, I would say it can be intimidating at first, but and understand you're kind of starting out in somewhat of a tough situation, in that the corrections environment has historically, we're kind of an insular environment in terms of who we are. We're kind of inward, internal to ourselves. Typically, historically, not a very open organization, maybe. But you'll find very quickly, once people on the inside, the staff, know who you are, you know, I would say there's, you know, not only nothing wrong with, but encourage, have the same kind of conversation you might have with anyone else as to how are you doing today, how's your day, you know, how are things going. Just spending that 1 or 2 minutes instead of just, okay, I'm here, I need to get processed in to go to this spot, and I'm going from A to B. You know, take a couple minutes to talk to the officer through the window as to, you know, how is their day going, and just over time create some of that familiarity, which I think will go a long way.
Yes. And Tom, most recently we had this wonderful experience and story shared with us of a particular correctional officer not being so keen on working with a rape crisis center. But as he heard actually at a training, another rape crisis center explain their role and what their purpose is in PREA and how they're incorporated in that, he understood it better and said, you know what, I realized then I didn't know what your role was or the purpose of you coming in here. But after hearing that, I now understand and absolutely know that I'm going to need you.
Right.
And so it really shifted the way he was even working with their local rape crisis center. And I think as advocates, you know, having opportunities, like you said, to build those relationships and have discussions of really why I'm here, and not be seen as a roadblock in an investigation, or you know, that you're keeping things from me. And it's very similar as the work that advocates have been doing with sheriffs, law enforcement, these past, you know, 40 years of this movement. And it's taken time, you know, to get there with law enforcement. But I think that as advocates, we just need to keep going. We just need to keep working at it, keep working on building those relationships, and not give up, because, you know, at the end of the day, those who don't benefit from that support are really our survivor inmates. Yeah,
you know, absolutely. And again, the more time you can take to educate, you know, educate those officers, like you said, as to what you're doing, and again, where they start seeing you as a problem solver. You know, what can you do for that officer coming in? And again, you know, and we may speak some of this later, but PREA, I'll just talk about PREA, going back to, and as Gwyn mentioned, on the early stages of when PREA was being developed, I was involved in some of those early reviews when I was with National Sheriff's Association, and the overall attitude toward PREA was not a positive attitude. PREA was looked at as, here's big government, here's the federal government pushing something else down on us. Here's, you know, unfunded mandates, more work for us, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but if you look at PREA, and again, in terms of how you come across to those officers and others, that really what it's about is good corrections management. And as you said in your example, Liliana, of this individual saying, wow, now that I know what you're coming in and doing, I'm very much for it. Because, again, in my experience, you know, coming up through corrections, the perception sometimes of an advocate is this advocate's coming in, you know, they're coming in because they probably received a letter of complaint from an inmate, and they're going to come in just to see what they can do to mess with us.
Yeah.
And that's being very honest, you know, to say, or they're only coming in because of, you know, this complaint that came out, or the inmates are just manipulating them. But then when they learn that what you can help them with, again, just using PREA as an example, that you can come in and help them, say, develop better protocols as it relates to evidence. Again, it's just good correctional practice. Who's not going to be for having good evidence protocol? Or who's not going to be for having better training to learn better investigative techniques? Or who's not going to be for within their work environment, having an environment for sexual safety. So sometimes there's a negative connotation to the word PREA, as this federal mandate, when really if you can break it down in your discussions as an advocate with talking to corrections people about why you're there, and again, what you can do to be relevant to, in fact, help them in those areas.
Great. Thanks so much for that insight, Tom. It's really helpful that we have you here as, you know, as an expert, and also giving your honest thoughts and how corrections really see us at times. And so it's really helpful to get some insight on then how and what the best approach will be as we reach out to them and continue to work to ensuring incarcerated folks have access to the support. And so, Tom, some of the things that we've been doing with the rape crisis centers and their facilities has been really creating a partnership and providing groups, providing in-person services, providing hotline services, and forensic exam support for inmates who disclose being victims of sexual violence. And so some of the things that our RCCs have had to work through with working with corrections is the understanding of confidentiality and why we are in the process of working throughout these things, understanding that corrections might have a certain view of confidentiality, and then what the law says regarding our advocates holding privileged confidential communication. And so, you know, that was our question that we had, but also in the chat box we have a couple of questions that I think really connect to this question. And what they're asking is, you know, can chaplains facilitate group sessions? And and how does it work when you're dealing with youth too, in the confidentiality piece? And I think we can speak a little bit more on youth and confidentiality, but are you aware if chaplains hold groups?
Yes, certainly in my experience, absolutely. The chaplains hold groups such as that quite often, actually. Yeah, so that I would say that's very much a standard practice, that you'll see that chaplains do hold these group meetings such as that. You know, one of the things, and you were talking about on the confidentiality piece, is I think one of the things that needs to be made clear is absolutely in terms of the legalities of confidentiality, but and again, this is where it's important to make the distinction, to let the correction staff know that you also understand in terms of confidentiality and security. That's always kind of an issue there. But I'll give you an example. There's certain things in terms of, let's say, a sexual assault that they're going to share that may be very confidential in nature. But there's other things that may be of a security concern for the facility that may not, in fact, be part of that confidentiality. I'll just give you an example. This is one in California. Not too long ago, I was involved in some work up at the California Central Women's Facility. And we did we're allowed to do some focus groups with different groups of female offenders. And we wanted to get in those focus groups from those female offenders some very, honest and upfront discussions about what they felt about the operations of that facility, and both good and bad. So at the beginning of this focus group that we had with various groups of women offenders, but we were also very upfront with them. We said, look, anything that we want to let you know that you're in a safe group here. We're not going to report back anything. Everything is confidential in terms of we're not going to report back anything you said about an officer or this or that or whatever. But we also set the guidelines or parameters and said, however, if we learn of information not confidential in terms of confidentiality, legal confidentiality, but in this discussion, they tell us of a upcoming escape attempt, that we have a responsibility, being allowed and being a part of that facility, that we're going to report that. So I think that's very key in terms of the advocate community when you're coming in, that you set those you need to sit down with the administration and set down those guidelines so that you're also telling those offenders that you're working with that you're safe in speaking with me, there are absolute confidentiality that I will keep, but I think on the other hand, you need to be transparent with those same offenders to say, but look, if you're talking to me and I'm just trying to throw out an example, and they tell you that they know that the person in the cell next door to them said that they were going to commit suicide, you can't not say anything. So I think it's important to say that set those kind of boundaries between, even though I'm coming in as a volunteer and as an advocate, I also have certain responsibilities to the facility that I'm in. So it's important, I think, to just up front set that differentiation between confidentiality that's needed for your work, but that doesn't mean I'm going to turn a blind eye to anything and everything I may see or hear within that facility that, quote unquote, it ain't my problem. Because if you take that attitude, then the administration, you're going to have a hard way to go.
Yeah, and Tom, as I'm hearing that, I think that this is why this conversations are so vital and important in working with facilities, because our advocates hold privilege, and because they're really forbidden by law to break that confidential communication. And so the only reason why they can break it would be harm to self or others. And so this is kind of something that comes up all the time with our survivors and our advocates. And so the way that we've really talked to our advocates about navigating this, especially if they're aware that someone's going to harm themselves, we as advocates don't want to break that confidentiality with the survivor, but we also are aware of the needs of others in that space. And so one of the things that we've shared with advocates that might be helpful is that if there was a disclosure of something to that effect of someone feeling suicidal, that the advocate has a conversation with the inmate who shared this, and that they can talk about what it would look like for them to come forward, what are the implications of that, and that if needed, the survivor can have the advocate come with them in reporting. And so that way it feels more empowerment-based for the inmate and a more collaborative approach. And so that confidentiality is still protected, and then we're still ensuring that people are safe. So, again, as you advocates are working with facilities, these are key conversations to have so that, the watch commander, the PCM, the warden, whoever you're connecting with, that they understand that really you're forbidden by law to break this, but you're going to be aware, of things as they come up, and do the very best to work those issues out with the inmate as they come to you. And so, again, thank you so much, Tom, for this. This is really, really amazing conversations that we're having. And in this question, too, we keep coming up to supporting youth specifically who disclose being sexually abused. And so we know that, that there is a sexual abuse to prison pipeline. And so our youth specifically have disclosed, and we know are higher risk of sexual violence or have experienced sexual violence before incarceration. And so one of the things that, we're doing with this project is helping folks understand how to empower youth when they disclose sexual violence as well. And so one of the things that we've been talking about is specifically around confidentiality. And if they hold confidentiality, our youth are not our advocates are not going to automatically report it unless, again, it's harm to self or others.
Absolutely.
And so one of the ways that we have talked about it, like I shared just earlier, is really ensuring that it's an ongoing conversation with youth on your limits of confidentiality as advocates. And as we continue to have those conversations, if a youth at some point says, I don't care anymore, I want some help because this is happening to me here in the facility, that as advocates we create a space where we can either go with them as they report, because PREA standards do allow for an advocate to be there during an investigatory process, right? And so those are ways that we've really helped our advocates navigate working specifically with youth. And we have 3 facilities in California and 3 agencies actually who provide services to youth in detention that are part of DJJ. And so this is how we've kind of addressed that confidentiality issue. But again, when we're talking about this, Tom.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right what you're saying, and that's a great way to approach it. And I would just say, in addition to, as you said, you have to continue to have these conversations with the youthful offenders. But also continue to have the conversations with the correctional management.
Yes.
So continue to have both those conversations in a very open way that, yes, you absolutely have responsibilities of confidentiality, but it's also important to continue to have conversations with the corrections leadership, just so that they understand that while you have absolute confidentiality requirements, that it's important that they understand that you also are cognizant of their concerns. That you're cognizant of the security of the facility, that you're cognizant of the need to prevent bodily harm to self and others, while still respecting the confidentiality that you're legally required to do. So I think those conversations are important to continue to have, both with the youthful offenders and with the corrections leadership.
Yes, and some of the things that some centers are doing are also creating pamphlets and handouts and posters so that they could be around the facility, so that it's very clear that these group of people from Coalition for Family Harmony or Women's Center High Desert hold confidentiality, right? And that they are aware constantly of this privileged communication. And so as centers start working around that, that they remember that.
And I tell you, I think those posters are great too, because the other thing is, not only does it keep in the awareness of the youthful offenders that they see that level of confidentiality, but believe me, the officers working in those units are reading those too.
Yeah.
So it's serving 2 purposes. It's kind of an educational purpose, primarily it's for the youthful offenders, but it also serves a positive secondary use when you have these posters and pamphlets out in the units, is that it's further educating the security staff at the same time.
Right, wonderful, yeah. Thank you so much. And so, Tom, you mentioned PREA, we mentioned the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and, we as advocates are very committed to ending sexual violence, and whether in our community, campuses, incarcerated settings, everywhere, right? We really do envision a world free from sexual violence. And so one of the things you said earlier was that that the term PREA can be a little bit of a negative for facilities, right? And so part of that is shifting that culture, is connecting with such an insular system like incarceration. But typically, or generally, how do you think our corrections staff feel about PREA?
Well, I would say I've definitely seen it not only in where I was in Washington D.C. most recently, but around the country. I think over the years now, how PREA is viewed is improving for the better, and I think that's because of people in corrections are becoming or have become more educated as to what PREA really is. But at the same time, and I'm generalizing here, again, I think just the terminology PREA, because it started out with kind of a negative connotation in terms of, again, going back to, this is Congress and the federal government establishing these guidelines and the Department of Justice, and they're pushing this down on us. To be honest, that's kind of the way it came across. And there's still many facilities, particularly on the local level, that feel like, because I've heard people say it, like, well, we don't have to comply with PREA. Like that's only for federal institutions and state prisons, but at the local level, we don't need to, comply with PREA. Well, so we have to continue to work and educate people about that. But again, I think going back to from the advocate viewpoint, the more you can talk about PREA in terms of what we're really talking about is good corrections management. So if you break down the things within PREA, we're really talking about good corrections management. If we're talking about making for better investigative techniques as it relates to sexual assaults, that's good corrections management. And it's, if you talk about how within our facility, what can we do to prevent sexual assaults within the facility? Absolutely. Now, when you say it like that, again, that's where it's just kind of changing that terminology, that maybe we don't talk so much of PREA in like an umbrella sense, but break it down in terms of let's talk to whoever you're interacting with on the correction side. Let's talk more in terms of what PREA really is in terms of putting forth good safety practices, good correctional practices ultimately.
Yeah, and one of the things that some of our RCCs have been doing in order to kind of combat that negativity of PREA, right, or being referred to as the PREA lady, and also understanding the inmate culture that can shut someone off and say, I'm not going to come talk to the PREA lady. And so one of the things that our RCCs have been doing is that, part of it has been creating groups. And it's not our typical groups that we do like in the community of, male survivor groups or, adults molested as children groups, because that has proven to be very, very much a deterrent of seeking support because of the culture within incarcerated settings. And so some of the things that our RCCs have been doing is kind of shifting it a little bit by saying, I'm offering a group for people who know a family member who's been victim of sexual assault. And there's a couple of classes that we're going to be offering. Some have offered art therapy as a way of healing from trauma. Some are, some have also thought of doing a cooking class for youth and incorporating discussions on healthy relationships or consent. What is consent? And so these are ways that our advocates have been able to kind of get their foot in the door with the inmate population. And those centers who have actually been doing this work now for some time, throughout these groups, throughout these trainings or presentations that they're doing, they have been approached by several inmates who privately have said, I've been a victim of sexual assault. This happened to me as a child. This happened to me, when I was at another facility. And so it's really created a space for folks to not, for inmates to come forward, like incognito kind of.
No, you're right. It's creating that safe space, and
absolutely.
And it's still bringing in like whether some of those examples you brought. you still can, within the context of those types of classes or whatever, you can bring in quote unquote elements of PREA.
Exactly.
And that, to your point, that gets away from being, oh, it's the PREA lady.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But you can infuse those elements of PREA into these other classes.
Right, and we've really realized how successful this approach has been, where now, unfortunately, there's wait lists for, support from a victim advocate who's coming in. I mean, it's a good thing,
right.
But now we have one person who's able to provide this support, and I think that it really will speak to corrections to understand the importance of PREA and the importance of victim advocacy within incarcerated settings, because they're seeing that there is a high volume of victims of sexual violence within incarcerated settings. And so, again, us as advocates, just reminding, correction staff of our purpose and finding more innovative ways in approaching the discussion of PREA with inmates, and start helping shift the culture. Tom, I was remembering something you said last time we met about the importance of creating a culture where reporting is okay if an inmate chooses that, and how it impacts this jail or prison.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
What I had been talking about was establishing a reporting culture, and that's something, reporting culture within the agency first, talking about that, in terms of, and one rolls over into the other, in terms of looking internally to, and I'm talking now on the corrections leadership side, looking internally into an agency or into a facility and saying, what is the work environment and what is the work culture in terms on the correctional side? Because all of those things flow over into how the staff interacts with the inmate population. How does that look in terms of reporting, and creating an environment where there's not a feeling of that there's going to be retaliation for reporting, that there's not going to be retaliation up the line, and again, even just within the staff function of that, if a staff member, does a staff member feel safe in reporting a violation of another staff member, as in terms of policy or protocol? Maybe a violation of a security protocol. Does a staff member feel an open reporting culture within the agency so that they're not going to then get retaliated against by the other staff member or by a supervisor and get retaliated for reporting? So, as a correctional manager, to also work on that piece internally, to say we have to create a open reporting culture in terms of our agency, and also have that go into a reporting culture as it relates to inmates feeling that they can safely report abuses, and that those abuses will not only be taken seriously, but then will be followed up with immediately, and there'll be follow through. I'll tell you just a quick little story going back to the District of Columbia. When I first came into the D.C. prison jail system, a number of the community and advocate community in the D.C. area was saying, because of some of the history that led up in D.C. correction, was there's no way in the world you're ever going to make this agency PREA compliant. And we have several large facilities, two main facilities in the D.C.'s urban jail system, and then run all the city's lockups, and then some of the halfway houses. Well, we did become PREA compliant and, passed full DOJ audits over a number of years. But what I wanted to get to was initially the response of staff, and we had a strong corrections union, just as California does have a strong corrections union, and they were very much against PREA. The union was against PREA. But it was because they weren't educated as to what PREA was about. Their first reaction is, this is just going to lead to unfounded complaints against officers. The inmates are just going to start manipulating us.
Right.
They're going to start filing complaints left and right that aren't going to be true, and it's setting all us up as officers, to get fired because of untrue allegations. So that was the honest reaction of a lot of correction staff to the implementation of becoming PREA compliant. What they found, though, over time, again, educating as to what it's about, going back to break it down to good correctional practices, what they found was, guess what? We're going to do a lot better job on creating protocols as it relates to evidence. We're going to create a lot better system as it relates to how people can report, openly report. We're going to create better investigative techniques, which also as an officer will also protect you on the other side, because we have now good protocols as to investigative techniques, and follow-up, which will protect both the inmate and will protect the officer. So that's just a quick example of where PREA came across as something very negative. It's just going to be used against us.
Right.
And over time, that absolutely did not bear out. And now there's a reporting culture where the inmates feel that they can report those abuses if they come about. And just as importantly, the staff have to get to the point to know that when those issues come out, that they will be looked at thoroughly, fairly, and in a comprehensive manner.
Right. And so, Tom, and I think that one of the things that stood out to me is the importance to have somewhat of a two-prong approach into working with incarcerated settings for our advocates. And one is obviously working with survivors of sexual violence, but the other is opportunities for training for staff, opportunities to provide training on trauma-informed investigation, sexual harassment, all of those to start creating, so to start creating that culture shift within staff that will trickle down to the inmate population as well. And so, just so we are aware of time and give folks the opportunity to ask any questions before we finalize here, our very last question that we have that we've heard throughout our work is safety. Some of our advocates at times are concerned of their own safety when in the facility. And so what would you tell somebody who is in the facility, new to the facility, an advocate? What would you say to them to help them kind of ease their worry on feeling not safe going in?
Well, again, I would say, part of that is get to know the staff that you interact with on the staff side. Everybody wants, believe me, the inmate population and the staff, everyone wants a safe environment. You don't not want a safe environment. So, get to know the staff, but also I would say one of the things within your safety is make sure you're always communicating with the staff as to where you're going, what you're doing, and where you're going to be, so they can check, they can check on you. Don't feel afraid to say, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable.
Right.
If your radar is kind of, coming up, don't be afraid to say something like, I probably am going to sound stupid if I say, I'm feeling uncomfortable. Don't feel like that. You absolutely should say something. If you feel a little bit, trust your instincts.
Good.
That's the best thing, I think, is really to to trust your instincts in that area. And again, and realize that those officers, particularly that you're working with, let's say if you're going to an area where you're going to do some counseling or whatever, again, understand that they know that you're going to be there, what you're going to be doing, but then they have 50 other things they're doing. So you need to understand within that environment that there's all these activities going on that those people are responsible for. They may have to be, they're off doing head counts. There's meals coming in. They have to deal with the meals. There's other programs going on just besides yours. There's educational programs. There's medical personnel and mental health personnel coming in and out of the housing unit,
Right.
That's going on. There may be visiting going on where they have to pull people to go to visiting. There may be sick call going on for the medical piece. So there's 20 other things going on, let's say, within that housing unit that you may also be conducting, your interviews or your focus group or whatever that you're doing. So again, as far as feeling unsafe in any terms, get those relationships with the people working, and just communicate as to what you're doing, who you're going to be with, and ask them. Again, ask. Nothing stupid. No questions are dumb. Ask the officer, whoever that may be, hey, could you call, I know you generally, maybe they tour back, whatever it is, you may be coming back 20 minutes from now, but would you mind just maybe coming back a couple more times, more often? I feel a little bit uncomfortable here. Feel free to ask those kind of questions, because me as an officer, I feel better too that the people, because ultimately I'm responsible for everything that's going on there, and I'm responsible for your safety also as a volunteer and as an advocate. So I feel much more comfortable that you're speaking to me and that we're interacting about your safety.
Absolutely. So advocates, if you're feeling, unsafe, please trust your instincts, share with the officers. And again, thanks, Tom, so much for these conversations, for our back and forth, and for the advocate questions. Thank you. And those are all my questions that I had. So I'm going to turn the time back over to Gwyn.
I am incredibly excited to continue our work moving forward. I've already told everyone that I've been very passionate about my work, and that both of our colleagues, Liliana and Tom, are very passionate about our work as well. I think for those of you who've been with us today on the webinar, you can hear their passion and their commitment to this work, and their knowledge, experience has been incredibly helpful in their contributions today in the webinar. So I really want to thank you both.
Thank you.
It's motivated me even more to go out, and hopefully the tips and pieces of information and advice that you've given will give that extra boost of confidence to some of the advocates who maybe have had some difficulties in how to move forward, or maybe difficulties and challenges in particular areas with, okay, I've got some new ideas, some new approaches I might try, and I'm going to give it a go. We want to be sure that everyone listening today is reminded that we've got additional resources for you. So Liliana will pull that slide up for you here. Remember that Just Detention International is available at any time through our website, of course, justdetention.org. CALCASA, of course, through there, calcasa.org. We've got all kinds of resources for you there, webinars as well. And then we've got the PREA Resource Center. We never want you to forget about them, PREAResourcecenter.org, very easy to remember the name. And they have an unbelievable amount of webinars that are archived there, as well as new briefs that, focus briefs, where they have pulled together by topical area the information on different sections of the PREA standards, including the victim services. So please do go back from time to time, take a look at the PREA Resource Center website. I want to also remind you that if you didn't get a chance to ask your questions today, that we're here to support you additionally through email addresses. You can reach the Just Detention team at advocate@justdetention.org or PREA@calcasa.org for our team here at CALCASA. Anytime you want, 24 hours a day if you just can't sleep and you're up at 3 a.m. and thinking about your work as we do. But our last slide we want to share with you is just for you. We really, really appreciate and value you. Thank you for your participation today. We decided that it was near and dear to our heart, our furry family members, and so we are bringing them to you today in hopes that their smiles will bring a nice smile to your day moving forward as well, because you do so much incredible work out in the field, and the challenges sometimes make it really hard for you to feel like smiling, and so sometimes these little feel-good moments are worth it and helpful. Your successes are incredibly important to us, and we really appreciate you having been an active part of our webinar today with your questions. We hope you're going to join us for our next session. Our next webinar will be January 18th in the new year, 2018. Can't believe it's almost here, but it will be soon. We're going to address working with incarcerated survivors with mental illness. So please do mark your calendars for January 18th, 2018. We'll be sending alerts out to you about that, and thank you again for being with us. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Bye-bye.